The night of July 7th, 1996, lay like an open wound over the Texas countryside. The air was heavy, stifling, as if the atmosphere itself carried secrets too heavy to be spoken. The isolated, forgotten field was wrapped in rural silence, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets and the restless lowing of stray cattle. But there was something more that night, a hidden vibration in the wind, an invisible anticipation that seemed to hold the breath of the entire earth. Those who were attentive would notice that the heavens were preparing to witness something that should never have been seen by human eyes. That night, something was seen that should never have been witnessed. A family inherited a cursed place, and they were mocked for believing in lights in the sky. But no one knew that the visitors were already watching. The story begins with the arrival of a man and his daughter. He, a war veteran, carried on his back not only the scars of past battles, but also the weight of an unexpected inheritance. She, too young to fully understand what was about to unfold, but sensitive enough to feel that fate was pulling her towards something greater than she could imagine. They arrive at a plot of land inherited from a deceased uncle, a piece of earth deemed worthless by everyone in the nearby town. All that remained there was an abandoned military barn, skeletal and crumbling, like a corroded monument to times of secrets that dust tried to bury. The nearby town always mocked the family. They said the land was nothing but ruins. There's only bats there, not aliens, the men at the bar would laugh. But the mockery, though cloaked in contempt, carried a shadow of unease, because everyone knew there was something strange about that. Lights had been seen slicing through the sky. Animals had vanished without explanation. But it was easier to laugh than to face the fear of the unknown. The contrast was stark. On one side, mockery and disbelief. On the other, the foreboding solitude that hung over every blade of dry grass he inherited. The father, resolute in the posture of one who had faced bloody battle, tried to convey security to his daughter. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that the barn wasn't just an abandoned structure. It was a sentinel, a witness to something that should never be forgotten. On that first night, as they unloaded their few belongings, the silence was shattered. A metallic sound echoed from the depths of the earth, deep and muffled, as if something ancient stirred beneath forgotten foundations. The cattle of a distant neighbor lowed in agony, as if sensing an invisible predator. The daughter, wide-eyed, clutched her father's arm and whispered with a trembling voice, "Someone's watching us." The father smiled, trying to rationalize. He said it was just electrical faults, perhaps old wires creaking in the wind, but deep down he felt a chill run up his spine. Among the trees, blue lights flickered briefly, like eyes closing too quickly to be confirmed. And so, what should have been a worthless inheritance began to reveal itself as something far greater. The forgotten legacy wasn't just land, it was a portal. The next morning brought a pale sun, unable to warm the barren fields surrounding the inherited property. The father parked the old car in front of a rusted gate that creaked like the iron door of a forgotten prison. Rust had devoured most of the structure, and each chain swaying in the wind sounded like a lament from times past. The daughter, her eyes sharp to every detail, surveyed the scene with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, as if the earth were imbued with something unseen but pulsing beneath its skin. The barn loomed before them, warped, with loose planks and broken tiles letting beams of light pierce through its cracks. Hanging on one of the still-standing walls was a corroded metal sign, barely legible, where the words "Military Area Restricted Access" once stood. Time had erased the paint, but it couldn't erase the weight of the memories that lingered there. Fallen wires snaked across the dry ground, and old posts marked the territory like the bones of an era when that place held significance, a significance now buried in abandonment. The father took a deep breath, forcing steadiness into his voice. "This is our new beginning." But the words sounded more like a fragile promise than conviction. His weary gaze betrayed that he didn't fully believe his own statement. The daughter, on the other hand, had a sharp intuition. Her silence wasn't just fear, it was perception. She knew somehow that there was more to this place, something beyond the dust and ruins. The weight of the inheritance wasn't just material. The deceased uncle, the land's last owner, had left a strange directive in his will, almost like a curse. Never ignore what's in the sky. The father tried to dismiss it as the delusion of a man too isolated, but as he mentally repeated the phrase, he felt watched, as if the air carried invisible eyes. That first night on the property, the tranquility was only apparent. The rural silence gave way to unsettling sounds. The neighbor's cattle began to low uncontrollably, as if something invisible had crossed the pasture. The metallic sound returned, stronger, echoing like subterranean hammer strikes from a place where nothing should be. The daughter rushed to the window, her face illuminated by a glow flickering among the trees. Small blue lights appeared and vanished, blinking in irregular intervals, as if following a mysterious code. The father, hardened by war, tried to ignore it. He said they could be hunters, lanterns, or even reflections of distant cars. But when he stood to check, a shiver ran through his skin like an electric current. There were no cars, no lanterns. The field was deserted. And yet, the blue glow continued to flicker, dancing like otherworldly fireflies. That same night, a metallic sound, almost like mechanical footsteps, echoed through the barn. The father rushed there, armed only with a flashlight, but found only silence and dust. Still, the sense of presence didn't leave him. The daughter, with her sensitivity, was direct. "Dad, they were here before we arrived, and they never left." The veteran took a deep breath, trying not to let fear show. But with each passing minute, the inheritance that seemed worthless began to reveal itself as a much heavier burden. It wasn't just forgotten land, it was a hidden legacy, guarded by silence and watched by the stars. The next morning's sun did little to dispel the strangeness of the previous night. The father went out early, inspecting the land around the barn, while the daughter walked alone through the dry pasture. It was she who suddenly stopped in front of something partially buried near one of the crumbling walls. Her eyes widened when she realized it wasn't just a rock. The object, metallic and smooth, reflected the faint sunlight as if freshly forged, but it had been buried for decades. She called her father, who approached cautiously. Upon touching the surface, he immediately noticed there were no signs of rust, wear, or dirt. It was cold, almost icy, as if alive, pulsing with invisible energy. It didn't resemble anything human. There were no screws, no fittings, no marks of known craftsmanship. Just a perfect piece, impossible to explain. The veteran tried to rationalize. He muttered something about experimental military scrap, some remnant of old tests. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the product of ordinary human technology. His daughter, however, had no doubts. Holding the fragment with reverence, she whispered, "They left this here, for us." When she ran her hand over the metal, a faint vibration coursed through the object. Small waves of blue light spread in delicate lines, like glowing veins under skin. The sensation was almost organic, as if the piece responded to human touch. The father, startled, quickly took the fragment from her hands, and the glow vanished instantly. During the day, they tried to forget the incident, storing the object in an improvised box. But at night, the silence was broken again. The metallic sound returned, more intense, accompanied by a low hum that made the windows vibrate. Outside, the moon illuminated the field, but there was something more. A tall, humanoid shadow stood in the distance, near the broken fence. It didn't move aggressively, just observed. The father's heart raced. The daughter, however, felt something different. Fear, yes, but also fascination. The presence didn't seem hostile, only mysterious. It was as if the shadow wanted to be seen, as if its existence was an invitation. The father, a former soldier, instinctively shielded his daughter, but he couldn't stop staring at the silhouette that vanished as suddenly as it appeared, dissolving into the air like smoke in a strong wind. Back at the barn, still shaken, they decided to search for clues. It was then they found among the debris a wooden box hidden under a broken panel. Inside, dust, an old videotape. The father played one in the ancient device, still among the rubble. The shaky footage revealed men in military uniforms inside that same barn, decades earlier, pointing cameras at the sky and speaking in tense voices. Reports of aerial anomalies were mentioned, along with phrases like, "They always return to the same place." The order is to record, never engage. The veteran abruptly stopped the tape, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. His daughter looked at him in silence, her eyes gleaming more with confirmation than fear. "See, Dad? We're not the first. They were always here." The father didn't respond. He just clenched his fists, feeling the truth approaching like an inevitable weight. The inheritance they received wasn't just abandoned land, but a stage for secrets forcibly kept by time and silence. And that night, for the first time, he understood that nothing would ever be the same. Before we continue, if this story is already stirring you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below what you would do if you saw something like this before your eyes. Your interaction strengthens this space even more. The days that followed were marked by growing tension. The father tried to maintain a routine, fixing parts of the barn and exploring the property, But the invisible weight of that place began to seep into every conversation, every silence, every exchanged glance between him and his daughter. The metallic fragment was stored, but the memory of its vibration and blue glow seemed to call them back constantly. It was impossible to forget. The daughter, increasingly convinced, said with determination, "They don't want to scare us. They want us to notice." The father, hardened by war scars and years of learning to distrust everything, couldn't so easily embrace the girl's faith. To him, there was always a hidden enemy, a lurking threat, something ready to destroy. Yet, there was something different about this situation. It wasn't bombs, gunfire, or men against men. It was something greater, incomprehensible, and it seemed to transcend human logic. It was in this tense atmosphere that the first unexpected visit occurred. The veteran's ex-wife arrived, accompanied by relatives, all with the same skeptical look. They came not out of concern, but out of disbelief. Upon hearing the stories already circulating in town, they decided to confront him. "Have you gone mad?" The woman spat with contempt. "Do you want to raise your daughter in the middle of ruins, with tales of aliens and delusions? This is insanity," the veteran tried to explain, but every word only seemed to fuel their ridicule. Talking about humanoid shadows, pulsing lights, and old military investigation tapes only reinforced the idea that he had lost his mind. His ex-wife threatened to take their daughter away. "I won't allow my daughter to grow up as part of this madness. You're dragging her into the same delusions as your uncle." The daughter, however, stood firm. With a calmness that surprised even her father, she looked at them all and said, "I know what I saw. They're not bad. They just want to be noticed." Her words echoed like a verdict. The silence that followed wasn't one of persuasion, but of discomfort. After all, how could they contradict the purity and certainty of a child who had witnessed something beyond human understanding? Still, the visitors left, muttering insults and mockery. The town would soon know, and the ridicule would grow even harsher. And it didn't take long. Days later, local authorities showed up at the property. Police and city officials, all with the same mocking tone, strolled through the land with lazy glances. The father greeted them coldly, already expecting their attitude. "You really believe you saw aliens? This is just tired people, fooled by the darkness of the countryside," one of the officers said, laughing as he kicked the dry dirt. Another added with irony, "You should be happy. Now you're famous. The whole town's talking about you." The veteran clenched his fists, fighting the urge to explode in anger. He knew what he had seen, what he had felt. But how could he convince men who came ready to mock? How could he face not only the unknown, but also the public opinion that ridiculed him? The daughter, once again, was the only one to break the silence. She approached her father, took his hand, and murmured with resolve, "Dad, they don't understand, but we do, and that's what matters." His heart tightened. For the first time in a long while, he realized that his daughter's faith was stronger than his own experience. She bore no war scars, no traumas, and perhaps that's why she could see what he couldn't, that this wasn't a threat, but a calling. As the authorities walked away, still laughing and whispering, the father felt that his battle wasn't just against mysterious visitors, but against the men around him, against ignorance, fear, and mockery. He knew the price of believing would be high. The town already branded him as crazy. His family already considered him lost. But deep down, his daughter's presence by his side kept him standing. And in that contrast between faith and disbelief, between truth and mockery, the veteran began to understand that it wasn't just about proving something to the world. It was about protecting his daughter, preserving the legacy entrusted to him, and being ready for the moment when the silence of the heavens would finally break for good. The barn, which at first glance seemed merely a derelict skeleton, began to reveal itself as a living organism, filled with secrets buried under layers of dust and oblivion. The father, determined to prove to himself that he still had control, spent hours exploring every corner. The daughter, silent, followed, guided by an intuition that always seemed to point to the right place. It was as if the space itself wanted to be discovered by her. It was during one of these searches that they found something unexpected. One of the barn's inner walls, seemingly solid, sounded hollow when tapped. The father knocked a few times and felt a different vibration. With effort, he removed the rotten planks, revealing a hidden space. Inside was a carefully sealed metal box, protected from time. Upon opening it, the heavy air of memory escaped. Inside were old reports, black and white photographs, cassette tapes, and pages of hastily scribbled notes. They were the uncle's files, the solitary man who had bequeathed the property. Everything was organized like a secret diary, a chronicle of decades of encounters the world never knew. The photos showed lights in the sky, captured in different years, always at the same point on the horizon. The reports described cyclical appearances, always returning at calculated interval, as if obeying a cosmic clock. There were even hand-drawn symbols, unknown, and notes about subterranean noises echoing from the earth. But nothing was as unsettling as the final note, written in trembling letters, almost like a testament. They always return to the same place. Since 1970, I've observed the same pattern. With each cycle, contact gets closer. The next return, July 1996. If I'm not alive, whoever is here must understand. It's not a coincidence, it's a choice. The father felt the ground shake beneath his feet. The date matched exactly with the inheritance he had received, as if everything had been orchestrated for him to be there, in that month, that night, in that barn. It wasn't just fate, it was a summons. The daughter, her eyes fixed on the uncle's notebook, spoke almost in a whisper. He knew you'd come. He knew we'd be here. The veteran closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the weight of that revelation. All the town's mockery, all the ex-wife's threats, all the authorities' disbelief, none of it mattered anymore. He now had confirmation that his uncle wasn't a mad old man, but a guardian of secrets that had spanned decades. The cassette tapes reinforced the mystery. Pressing play on an old recorder, they heard the uncle's weary voice. They're not enemies, but they're not our equals either. They test, they observe, they offer signs. Never ignore what's in the sky. One day, someone will have to decide whether to tell the truth or keep it until humanity is ready. The voice faded into static, but the message was clear. The uncle had left not just land, but a mission. That night, the weight of expectation became almost unbearable. The father sat on the barn's porch, chain-smoking, staring fixedly at the starry sky. He knew the encounter couldn't be avoided. Every sound, every light, every record found pointed to the inevitable. They were coming back. The daughter, by his side, seemed less scared than curious, as if, deep down, she already knew her future was tied to this. The veteran, in silence, finally admitted to himself the inheritance was never about land or property. It was always about secrets, choices, and legacy. And now, with July advancing, the cosmic clock was about to strike. The night fell with absolute silence, as if even the insects and wind knew something was about to happen. The sky was clear, speckled with stars that seemed closer than ever. The father and daughter stood outside the barn, restless, each carrying a mix of fear and anticipation. The metallic fragment, stored for days, now rested on an improvised table on the porch, as if it were the gravitational center of the entire experience. Suddenly, without warning, the silence was broken by a beam of light that tore through the sky. It wasn't lightning, nor a meteor. It was a luminous blade, slicing through the clouds and illuminating the earth with impossible precision. The father stood abruptly, his heart racing. The daughter, in contrast, took a few steps forward, as if drawn to the light. The beam multiplied. 3 triangular points appeared in the sky, hovering motionless, defying known laws of physics. There was no engine noise, no vibration in the air, just a heavy, dense silence charged with invisible electricity. The veteran, accustomed to identifying aircraft by sound, altitude, or movement, knew in that instant this wasn't human. The triangle of lights began to descend, slowly, until it hovered over the property. The air grew colder, and a blue glow enveloped the barn in a supernatural sheen. Then, figures began to emerge. 3 humanoids descended amidst the light. They were tall, slender, their movements fluid, almost ethereal. Their eyes, large and luminous, reflected something that wasn't aggression but also wasn't frailty. There was resolve, there was purpose. The daughter, her eyes fixed, showed no panic. Her face held an almost hypnotic serenity, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. The father, on the other hand, wavered between protective instinct and paralyzing fascination. War memories screamed at him to run, fight, resist. But nothing about these beings resembled enemies. There were no weapons, no threatening gestures, just presence. One of the humanoids raised a hand, and a pulse of light coursed through the space. The metallic fragment on the table responded instantly, glowing in sync with the crafts above. The light was intense, but not blinding. It seemed alive, breathing. The object that had only vibrated before now pulsed in perfect harmony with the visitors. The daughter, without hesitation, approached and extended her hand. When her fingers touched the fragment, fully activated, emitting waves of light that spread in circles across the ground. The father took a step forward, torn between stopping her or letting it happen, but it was clear. The object recognized The silence was broken only by the veteran's heavy breathing. He knew this moment wasn't chance. Everything the uncle had written in the reports, all the warnings, all the records, it all culminated here. The daughter held the fragment, which now seemed light in her hands, as if made for her. The beings, motionless, watched. They didn't advance, didn't speak, didn't attack. They just waited. The father realized with a shiver that this wasn't just contact, it was a test. They had delivered a sign, and now they awaited a response. His heart pounded uncontrollably. For a moment, he considered snatching the object from his daughter's hands, protecting her from the unknown. But something inside him, a silent voice, told him that decision wasn't his. The fragment had chosen, and his daughter's eyes shone, reflecting not fear, but acceptance. The aliens took a step forward, synchronized, as if they were one. The glow in their eyes intensified, mirroring the blue hue of the fragment. The sensation was clear. They were communicating, not with words, but with energy, with presence, with something beyond human language. The veteran, stunned, realized that his entire life of preparing for wars, battles, and enemies hadn't prepared him for this, because it wasn't a battle, it was a choice. And that night, under the July sky, in front of witnesses who would never be believed, the line between myth and reality vanished forever. Cliffhanger. The beings remained there, waiting. The fragment pulsed in sync. The daughter looked at her father, awaiting his decision. The visitors didn't want to impose. They wanted to know what would be the response. The following night carried the weight of centuries. The father barely slept, tormented by the images replaying in his mind. The tall figures, the luminous eyes, his daughter reaching out without fear, and the metallic fragment pulsing as if it were an extension of her heart. He felt powerless, a soldier trained to face enemies, now confronted with something that wasn't war or invasion. It was something greater, something that demanded more than weapons or courage. It demanded faith. At dawn, he rummaged through the uncle's belongings hidden in the barn again. There were tapes they hadn't yet seen. With trembling hands, he inserted one into the old recorder. The grainy image filled the screen, revealing the uncle's weary face. His voice, hoarse, sounded like a whisper from beyond. If you're watching this, it means they've returned. Listen carefully. They're not enemies, but they're not gods either. They've come to observe, to offer choices. They'll never force. They always wait for the human decision. Remember, one day, humanity will have to choose between truth and the comfort of ignorance. The father froze. Each word seemed to pierce his skin. The uncle knew. He had witnessed encounters, carried the same burden of disbelief and solitude, and yet he left the warning, not as delirium, but as responsibility. The daughter, listening attentively, turned to her father with teary eyes. He knew you'd be here. He knew I'd be here too. Dad, this isn't a coincidence. We're part of this. The veteran pressed his hands to his face, suffocated by the weight of the truth. His entire life of discipline, military training, and seeking logic in everything now seemed to crumble. Because this wasn't about logic, it was about legacy. The uncle's notes reinforced the dilemma. They're not an immediate threat, but the revelation can destroy before it liberates. Governments, corporations, religions, they'll all try to silence it. The world isn't ready, but the world will never be ready if no one has the courage. The father understood. He stood at a crossroad. On one side, he could reveal to the world what he had seen, the lights, the beings, the records, but he knew that would bring destruction, not just for him, but for his daughter, who would be exposed, used, perhaps even hunted. On the other side, he could keep silent, protect the secret, carry the responsibility of guarding a bridge between worlds until the time was right. The daughter, unlike him, didn't fear exposure. Her pure, sensitive heart saw the visitors differently. She didn't see them as a threat, but as silent teachers waiting for someone to acknowledge them. For her, keeping the secret was like denying the mission. The veteran, however, knew the weight borne by those who dared to be the voice of the impossible. He had seen men destroyed merely for challenging human authorities. What would happen to them if they challenged the entire world with a truth that shattered all certainty? While the daughter insisted that they deserved to be seen, he paced back and forth, restless, trapped in the dilemma. He remembered the uncle's phrase, "Never ignore what's in the sky." Now he understood. It wasn't just about looking up, but about having the courage to acknowledge what he saw. That night, sitting in the field, the veteran felt the presence again. There were no visible lights, but the atmosphere seemed to pulse. It was as if the visitors were there, watching, waiting, but not forcing. The metallic fragment rested in his daughter's lap, glowing softly, like a heart synchronized with the sky. And in that moment, the veteran understood what his uncle had tried to convey in every report, every recording. The encounter wasn't about easy answers, it was about choices. They didn't come to conquer or save. They came to offer a truth, and it was up to humans to decide whether they wanted it. The legacy wasn't just the land, it wasn't just the barn. The legacy was the responsibility of being the guardian of a secret capable of transforming or destroying the world. And now, that burden was in his hands. The night of July 20th arrived like a sentence. The air was denser, as if every molecule carried the weight of the choice that could no longer be postponed. The father and daughter stood outside the barn, the metallic fragment glowing softly in her hands, pulsing in sync with a sky that seemed to breathe. The veteran, accustomed to making quick decisions amid the chaos of war, now found himself paralyzed before a dilemma no military strategy could resolve. There were no maps, no orders, no allies, just him, his daughter, and a secret that could change the course of humanity. The daughter broke the silence, looking at her father with resolve. What if we're never ready? What if keeping the secret is the same as betraying what they entrusted to us? Her words cut deep. He knew that revealing the truth would unleash a storm. Governments would try to silence them. Scientists would doubt. Society would brand them as lunatics. The world wasn't prepared, but at the same time, hiding meant living as prisoners of an invisible burden. The veteran looked up at the starry sky. The lights returned, forming geometric patterns, triangles, circles, perfect lines moving in sync. It wasn't chaos. It was a message. It was a promise. The stars, in that moment, weren't just distant points. They were signs, as if the universe itself confirmed they were being watched. He clenched his fist, fighting the weight of responsibility. He remembered the uncle's recorded words. They never force. They only offer. The choice is always yours. The father took a deep breath, his heart pounding like a drum. War had taught him to protect, and that lesson was the only one he could carry into the present. He looked at his daughter and said, with a grave, definitive voice, "We'll keep the secret. We'll protect this, protect you, until the world is ready. Because right now, revealing the truth would mean losing more than we'd gain." The daughter fell silent. Her eyes glistened with tears, not of fear, but of frustration. She wanted to believe humanity could handle the revelation, but she understood that her father bore scars she didn't have. He saw dangers where she saw hope. He saw war where she saw encounter. But deep down, she knew his decision was also love. He wasn't hiding out of cowardice, but out of protection. And in that moment, she chose to trust. Both remained side by side, looking at the sky. The lights flickered in increasingly complex patterns, as if sketching a farewell. There was no sound, no words, just the certainty that this wasn't the end, but a pause, an interval until the next cycle. Some encounters don't exist to give immediate answers. They exist to prepare hearts. What that family saw wasn't just a phenomenon in the sky. It was a call, a silent promise that one day all of humanity will face the same gaze, the same choice. And when that day comes, there will be no more room to laugh, mock, or deny. The sky will speak for itself. The father and daughter stayed silent, their hands joined, the metallic fragment pulsing softly between them. And on the horizon, the lights vanished, leaving behind the shadow of a certainty they would return. The silence reclaimed the field, but it was no longer the same silence as before. It wasn't empty, it wasn't oblivion. It was a charged silence, as if every grain of earth and every star above held the memory of what had happened. The veteran and his daughter sat side by side, still gazing at the horizon where the lights had disappeared. Neither dared to speak. Both knew that human words were too small in the face of what they had witnessed. In his mind, the decision still echoed. Keep the secret, not out of cowardice, but out of love. His daughter deserved to grow up without being hunted, used as a test subject, or marked by the mockery and contempt of a world unready. The uncle had understood this. Now he understood. And yet, he also knew this burden couldn't be buried. One day, inevitably, humanity would face the same encounter. The veteran took a deep breath, looking at the ruined barn that now seemed like a silent altar. That inherited land wasn't a common heritage. It wasn't just ruins. It was responsibility. It was a portal between two worlds. One looking up, full of doubts, and another looking down, in silence, waiting for the right moment. The daughter, still holding the fragment, finally spoke. "They haven't gone, Dad. They're just waiting." And he knew it was true. The lights might have vanished, but the sensation remained. They were there, invisible, watching, evaluating, waiting for the moment when it wouldn't just be two isolated witnesses, but all of humanity, united under the same sky. The encounters of that family were no accident. They were a call. What seemed like a worthless inheritance was, in truth, a millennia-old legacy. It wasn't just land, but the guardianship of a secret. They haven't gone. They're just waiting. And the sky, when it speaks again, won't ask for permission. It will reveal what has always been before us. The question is, will we be ready? The father and daughter, small silhouettes against the vast moonlit field. The barn, warped, stands as a silent witness, and above them, the sky pulses with stars that seem more alive, as if blinking in code, a promise etched in the firmament. If this story spoke to you, don't leave without subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. Leave in the comments what you would do if you were chosen for an encounter like this. Your opinion might open the eyes of others who still doubt. Let's spread the truth together.